Teaching skills. Error correction. In this input, we'll look at why learners make errors, when we should correct them and when we shouldn't, and some error correction techniques which we found work well in the classroom. So the first acronym we're going to look at is something called BOOST. To boost means to encourage and make something stronger and better. This is a good way of remembering the key principles for effective feedback. Feedback should be balanced. Use the feedback sandwich. In other words, praise, correct, praise. It should be observed. You give feedback on what you hear and see your students do. For young learners, this means both language and behavior. Be objective. Focus on how the student is doing during the activity. Don't talk about your general opinion or what they had done before. Be specific. Make sure the student knows what he is doing well and what needs to be improved. And make it timely. Where appropriate, give feedback as soon as possible. This gives them an opportunity to try again, improve, and remember in a positive way. If we wait too long, students might not connect the feedback with the language or action. However, there are some activities, especially for older learners, when we want to delay the feedback. We don't want to interrupt them if the focus is on communication and fluency, or overcorrect and make them feel reluctant to experiment with the language, or risk raising their affective filter. Balanced feedback is really important for challenging and motivating learners. When you correct them, make sure you also listen out for and praise improvement. Praise their efforts. Telling a student after class that you noticed that they worked really hard and improved can really increase their confidence and motivation. But be careful. Too much praise for everything that they do may mean that students just start counting how many times they get a star or hear "good job" plus their name without really thinking about why. Remember to be specific and say what they did well. So, why do learners make errors? There could be a number of reasons for this. It might just be a slip. They actually know the correct answer, but they've fallen back into incorrect language habits. It could be because of their developing into language, and they haven't learned the right meaning, use, or form yet. They may be trying to make rules and guess. Incorrect language could also have become a habit which is not easy to correct. We call this fossilization. It could be L1 transfer, which is a direct translation from Chinese or whatever their L1 is into English. Or certain sounds in English may be mechanically difficult to make because they don't have them in their own language. So they approximate by coming up with the closest sound in their language to the target sound. Why do we correct errors? Well, for several fairly obvious reasons. We want to raise their awareness of the language errors they're making. We want to show them what the correct version of what they are trying to say is. We want them to progress and become better at English. And we want to avoid errors becoming fossilized, which is what happens if they continue to make the same mistake and it goes uncorrected over and over again. So now we'll look at why and when do we correct errors. We correct errors to help our students to progress and to avoid fossilization. But there are many times when we don't correct them because it may stop the students from guessing and experimenting. It may make them more confused, or it may make them feel bad. They may not be able to process the correction because they haven't perhaps reached a certain level of proficiency where this would be possible. We also need to think about whether the error they have made actually impedes communication to the point where the message is unclear or lost, or if the error does not affect communication and can be, for now, just noted down to be addressed at a later stage. We need to think about each student individually when giving feedback. Some need pushing, while others need to be treated very gently. Again, a balance is essential. So we need to think about when the best time is for error correction. We can either do hot correction, and this is when it is vital the student knows as soon as possible that they've made a mistake. We usually do this when we are focusing on accuracy. So, for example, the student has to get a particular grammatical structure right during a controlled practice task. Or we're focusing on accurate pronunciation during drilling. However, when the focus is on fluency, we want them to be able to speak without them worrying about being interrupted, and so risk them losing that spontaneous flow of language that can occur during a free practice task. You might find it's a common error being made among several students, and so note this down as you monitor. What we've found usually works well is, as you monitor and listen to them speak, write important errors that need addressing up on the whiteboard as the students are doing the activity. This way, when they are done with the speaking task, you can refer to the list of errors straight away. Ensure the errors you focus on are pertinent to the language point or topic. Another thing to remember, don't point out who made the mistake. Simply mention that you had heard a couple of things that weren't quite right, and you'd like to see if they can be corrected. Chances are, the student who made the mistake will know it was theirs, and will end up self-correcting anyway. So, who corrects errors? The best thing, ultimately, is if the students can correct themselves. They can do this, or often do this, when they realize they've made a mistake. Give them a chance and some time to correct themselves. Students can also correct their peers. They can learn a lot from each other, and not just from the instructors or the materials. Peer correction often has a positive effect on the group. If the students or their peers can't correct the error, this is when the instructor would step in to help. There are many techniques for helping your learners correct themselves. You can raise your eyebrows, pause, or frown to look confused. You can repeat what they said up to the error. So if a student says, for example, "My dog always eat meat," you could say, "My dog always..." You can use gestures to indicate time. Pointing behind you is an easy way to show that they need a past tense. Pointing ahead indicates the future, and pointing down is usually indicative of now. You can show the error physically. For example, if students get prepositions of place wrong, you can indicate what they said that was incorrect, either kinesthetically or in a drawing if this is not possible, so they can see the effect the error could have on the listener's understanding. For example, if they said they got on a car, you could draw a stick man of a person on a car to hopefully elicit from the student that they want the word in. Another useful technique is what we call finger modeling. These are really helpful when it comes to error correction. Each finger means one word or one sound. You show the problem by indicating the finger. Here are some examples for different kinds of errors. If you want to show a missing contraction, you can pull two fingers together to show that I am becomes I'm. You can show that there's a word missing. For example, I went to market. Finger 1 is I, finger 2 is went, finger 3 is to, finger 4 represents the missing word, finger 5, market. Say each word out to the student, but remain silent on the missing word, and see if they can work out what that missing word is, which is the in this case. You can show the part that has the error. For example, the second word or sound. So, I go to school yesterday. Again, attribute each word to a finger and waggle the finger for go. Look questioningly at the student and see if you can elicit the correction. For a word that isn't necessary, you can fold down one finger. Pause the video now and see if you can do this with your partner. I'm going to mention a couple of errors and see if you can together work out how to do the finger modeling for each. Number 1. I have not got it. Number 2. I not got it. 3. I love eating the chocolate. To continue with some other correction techniques. With older students, you can actually tell them the type of error. For example, tense. For adult students with greater proficiency, and who have maybe studied English for some time, you can occasionally use meta-language to elicit corrections. Older students may also appreciate the use of timelines to highlight any errors in tenses they are making. You can use reformulation and repeat back a corrected version of something a student has said. For example, a student could say, "He have a cat," and your response would be, "Oh, he has a cat." For pronunciation errors, the use of the IPA or stress and intonation marks can be useful in indicating errors to the students. You can show them what phoneme they are producing versus which one they should be producing. Same with stress and intonation patterns. Also, showing your mouth shape to make the correct sound is also visually very effective. And by merely doing that as well, you use no teacher talk time, which is always a bonus. If your learners are old enough to produce writing, they'll also need feedback on their written language. It can be difficult to decide on what and how much to correct. Many students don't like writing because their work comes back full of red marks. If the instructor only makes a few comments, they may feel that their efforts didn't pay off. So here are some techniques you can use. Underline good use of language in, for example, orange. Use a different color, such as green, to underline language that needs correction. You can write the corrections above the incorrect language. However, this doesn't give the learner much opportunity to think about and remember the errors, so best to see if they can think about what the mistakes they made could be, and give them the chance to correct themselves. You can use a correction code to show the type of error and encourage the learner to make improvements. For example, WO, word order, WW, wrong word, T, tense, SP, for spelling, and P, for punctuation. You'll find the correction code in your handbook. Make sure that you also comment on the communication of meaning and what the student has written, not just the language. For example, you could write something like, "Wow, what a scary story," or "You had a really nice day at the beach." In other words, respond to their ideas, not just their grammar or spelling. They want to know that their stories have been appreciated in more than just a language capacity, which can also help boost motivation. Your comments on students' work should act as guidance, showing how the student can improve. Now, it's your turn. On pages 4 and 5 of your error correction task sheet, work with a partner. On page 4, discuss the spoken errors listed and decide if and how you would correct them. On page 5, what techniques looked at in this input would you use to correct the errors? Try them out with each other. Be prepared to share your ideas on the Edmodo forum. So to sum up, in this input, you've looked at the different reasons why learners make errors, why we sometimes correct those errors, and why we sometimes don't. You also looked at a number of different techniques you can use when correcting errors. What is important to remember is that wherever possible, try to keep the error correction stage of your lesson as student-centered as possible, which is why we generally prioritize self-correction, just in case a student has made a slip. If the student can't self-correct, this is then followed by peer correction, then teacher correction, if the error has arisen out of an actual gap in the student's knowledge. So, going forward, focus on how you correct errors in your lessons in the week ahead. Look at some of the error correction techniques that we've looked at in this input, and try using some of them to see how they work. Discuss them with your group and compare what techniques you've tried with your respective classes. Organize your notes, highlight key information, concepts, and terms you've learned. Prepare any questions, comments that you might want to raise with your group. And if you are able to incorporate any of these ideas in your teaching, make notes of any insights you want to share. Thanks for listening, and see you next Wednesday.